Hello and welcome to PSG Review. After what has felt like an endless summer of football for national teams, we're finally back with the clubs. It's very exciting. PSG started the preseason match action in Austria. No fireworks yet. It always is a slow start. That is normal, but of course the transfer window is in full swing. A lot to cover. Thank you for being with me.
You are listening to PSG Review. Here's your host, Mikko.
Find and follow the show online at PSG Review Pod on Twitter and at PSG Review on Instagram and TikTok. Like, share, recommend, whatever you please, and thank you for listening. That's always lovely. We have come a long way and I do appreciate your time. After a long wait, club football is back. That much I already mentioned. We will talk about the first preseason friendly match of the summer, which was Wednesday, the 7th of August. That is yesterday for me, as I'm recording this on Thursday morning. The first friendly match out of two, which is very little to be honest with you, but the beginning of the season proper is roughly 1 week away now, so there's no time to waste. PSG had traveled to Klagenfurt in southern Austria. It's closer to Slovenian border than, say, the capital city Vienna. And against us were Sturm Graz, the defending champions of Austrian Bundesliga. And they had already had a few more matches for this season. They already actually have started their season, which they, by the way, did by being beaten by the club that is familiar to us PSG fans, that is Rapid Vienna, the club that PSG did beat in 1996 final of the Cup Winners' Cup. But back to this time now. In all fairness, while the level of this team isn't supposed to be anywhere near PSG, the fact that they were further in their preparation and even in full season already, it did show. It's not about the ability as much as it's about sharpness, the small things like that. PSG was very rusty, as you could have guessed. It's normal, and what isn't normal is that this match wasn't played on our training ground, which usually is the context for this first friendly, just to get, the cobwebs out of the joints and bones. PSG started with pretty much unrecognizable lineup, and Carlos Soler, out of all players, if you can believe it, was the one with the captain's armband. Well, it's not like there were any other players that would have been as long as he had in our first team, that were starting this match, of course. Our new backup keeper on goal backline with Yoram Zaghe, Milan Skriniar, Naufel El Hannah and Lucas Beraldo. Midfield with Ibrahim Baye, who was playing partially as a winger on the left side. It was written down as 4-4-2, but it might have looked more like 4-3-3, to be honest with you. Marco Asensio, Carlos Soler and Lee Kang in there also in the midfield, and going forward Gonzalo Ramos and Randal Colomwani. Not very important, this whole thing, just sort of running through these facts. It's not that important how we were lining up, and we will talk a little bit about this in a second, but this just is what it happened to be. Really no need to get too much stuck into the whole match, the going-ons of anything that was happening, because like I said, it is a meaningless friendly match, the first one of the preseason. But let it be said that Ibrahim Baye scored a lovely goal, as did Carlos Soler from a perfect build-up by Colomwani, very, very strong in that situation. The home side got their goal from our defensive mistake. The goalkeeper could have done a lot better, I think. Also the same with the equalizer. It was 2-2 then. Basically, the nature of the match was that PSG held almost all of the possession, but not a lot of it on the attacking half of the pitch. It's all very understandable. On the pitch, we had sort of loose collection of players with not all that much cohesion, and Asensio and Soler weren't exactly unbeatable in the midfield either, as you could have also guessed, but this is a friendly match, a warm-up, and it's neither here nor there how it goes. What matters is that this is a step to the desired direction, and broadly speaking, this is what this match was. It certainly was the first step. It was not a leap, but it was a step nevertheless. Alarming thing from the first half was an injury to Lucas Beraldo. We will see how serious it is when we get more information about it. I saw him on crutches after the match, but hopefully that's just a precaution. Otherwise, we are in trouble, even with our new player incoming, and more of that later. As per usual, there was a lot of rotation, not very even rotation, I would say. That much can be said about Luis Enrique's strategy, whatever it might have been. And it's really kind of difficult to say how does he approach this whole preseason, because on one hand, the players have come back from their national team. Some of them haven't been in the tournament. Some of them have been in the tournament. There are even some players who still are in the tournament in the Olympics, namely that's Arnau Tenas and Ashraf Hakimi. But all in all, the players are in a very different places. Some have played a lot and some haven't played that much. Some have been very disappointed. Some will be very happy with the way that the summer has gone. So right now, I don't really know what Luis Enrique's priority in matches like this is. But of course, essentially, it will has to be that we need to be ready when the season starts properly, because that's when things start actually mattering. For now, these friendly matches, it doesn't really make much difference. So basically how he chose and selected the team at any given moment on the pitch, it was a little bit confusing. Sometimes we didn't have a midfield at all, and then we brought 4 midfielders at the same time. So it could have been a little bit more even-handed, I think. Asensio and Soler played the full match. I don't know, perhaps they were in a shop window for someone to see them and want to buy them, but not based on this performance, certainly not for very many euros. That would be my guess. It wasn't a great match from them, but at the same time, what do you expect from such a match, from a friendly match? There's always the threat that you want to read something into it, but you can't read a lot into it. So it's difficult to know exactly what kind of conclusions you are able to jump without looking quite foolish. But let's not jump into too many conclusions, but I think there's some stuff that we can kind of elaborate and assess a little bit, because this is the nature of this time of the year. Basically, it's difficult to say very much about someone like, for instance, Gonzalo Ramos. I will talk about him more in a little bit, but if he plays as a target man with no structure around him or behind him to provide the balls, essentially not really a proper midfield, it will look underwhelming. Like I said, that initially it was very difficult for PSG to even get the ball over the halfway line. It was just really not happening. And in the first half, the couple of times that they did manage to do that were goals or otherwise dangerous situations. So it's a complicated thing, and it can easily look like Gonzalo Ramos was very underwhelming there, but what can you do if you don't get the service? What I would like to see is having sort of a full sensible lineup with all roles in all lines occupied by players who are able to play them and who improve as a collective. When they are there together, they are better than what they would be, of course, on their own, playing their own position, sort of excluded from the rest of the reality as it is happening around them. It's too early to start criticizing the coach. Don't worry, I won't get into that for many, many reasons, and not just because this is a friendly and the first one of them and it doesn't matter. But the selections, I guess, are dependent on all these things I mentioned already. How many minutes each player have in their legs, when have they returned from the international duty, what kind of summer holiday they have had, how much have they played during the summer, for instance, in the Euros or Copa America. Skriniar, for instance, was playing, but no Vitinha or Nuno Mendes. Ramos and Neves played from the Portuguese side for some time. So even within a national team like Portugal, some players who had played more were resting, and some players who hadn't played as much during the Euros, like Gonzalo Ramos, for instance, and Neves. They were getting their minutes, even though they have only just returned from their summer holidays, and essentially Neves was only announced as a PSG player a few days ago before this match. Still, it would have been nice to have a little bit more complementary lines of midfield and attack, especially. It was quite underwhelming, but these things happen. This is a preseason for you, although the issue, I guess, is that the preseason this year is very short. Last summer we played a friendly match at the training center, then 3 matches in Japan and 1 more in South Korea. Now we have this match that was played in Austria, RB Leipzig in the weekend, and then it's the real deal. we start accumulating League One points, and that campaigns run until next summer. So not a lot of time to muck about. The serious football is very nearly here, and we don't really have a lot of time to prepare for that. Essentially, we have one more match. As things stand, we have one more match, and that is against RB Leipzig on the weekend. So that is as much as we have time to prepare. Of course, there are practices and training and all sorts of things. Some players are still coming back, and who knows, new players are going to be signed. We will find more about that as we go along. Second half highlights of the match were the first minutes for João Neves and Gabriel Mochardo, two players in our midfield that I think we've been waiting for quite a long time to come. It feels like that, certainly to me. Also the return of Warren Zaire-Emery and Bradley Barcola. It was nice to see those things, but as a match, we won't be reminiscing over this for years to come. I think that's pretty safe assumption. This was the very first match of the preseason. I keep on saying that, and in that way it was very meaningless. That has to be emphasized. I guess the meaning, if there is any, is to get back on the pitch playing football for 90 minutes, for the players to reset their focus on the club football, although hopefully that had already happened before, but just to reclimatize to this new season with a partially new team and a new focus. What tends to be interesting is to see young players getting their chances in these pre-season friendlies, which they more or less took. Perhaps Ibrahim Baye, I already mentioned him, he scored a goal, a nice goal, and he was the most exciting one of those who, that we haven't seen before in the first team, I would say. He could be there competing for some chances in the rotation, certainly in Coupe de France, earlier rounds, things like that. He has a good size on him, and he's also a very quick and technical winger. It was nice to see him there. To me, he was the positive take-home message of this match, I would say. And I will say this match, our new backup keeper, he could have saved both of the goals, but didn't. I'm not saying that they were essentially his fault, but I'm just saying that a better keeper could have caught those balls. Neither one of them were impossible in any way. It was a fairly poor showing from him, and I have no idea why he's been recruited, to be honest with you. It seems to me that it wasn't because of the shot stopping any more than it was his ball delivery, which isn't an upgrade to Donnarumma, and it definitely, based on this match, is a lot below Arnaud Tenas as well. I know these days the prices of players tend to be quite high. There's nothing very much that is cheap, certainly available for a club like PSG, but he was not massively cheap. So I thought, as much as I wouldn't want to see PSG doing business with Russian companies, which his previous club was, and sending money to them, to a country fighting a war of aggression currently, perhaps there would have been a method to this madness. I thought that there must be something behind it, but right now I'm thinking that you could have gotten a far better keeper, at least based on this very small and very early sample size. But I wasn't impressed, and I can't help but feel that there must have been some ulterior motive for this bit of bestness. Perhaps I'm over dramatic. I don't know, but he wasn't ready against the Austrian team, so not sure why he would be ready against much stronger teams that we are going to be playing during the course of this autumn and the whole season, quite frankly. At the same time, I'm seeing rumors that Marseille could be after Maurice Dior, our Titi Parisian, a very good keeper from Clermont Foot that went to the Ligue 2 for this season, and hopefully he doesn't go to Marseille. I really wish that he is not going to go there. Perhaps that is just some kind of a wish list that I saw online that was linking them, but just to say that there are far superior keepers even from our own academy who could have been gotten if we need a solid backup. But this deal has been made now. You can't reverse it. Our deal. There's no turning back. So we're gonna just have to live with it. Whether I wish that we could turn back time, so to speak. Someone on Twitter then pointed me towards a story I had missed. I did tweet about this, and there was this story in June of the summer, and according to that, Quizza Kvaratskhelia agent had been pushing for this deal for this goalkeeper. Basically, the implication was that this guy was hired in order to buy a favor to get the Georgian winger soon after. I don't know if that's true. That I don't have any hard evidence on me, but based on this one match, and I admit it is very little football to make many conclusions, but this guy is our third keeper behind Donnarumma and Tenas. That would be my expectation, but then what do I know? Mind you, this summer there are two keepers who have left the squad due to running out of contracts. That's Letelier as well as Sergio Rico. So we are still one keeper short unless one comes from the academy side, which it might. At some point we have to seriously also consider the Champions League squad selection quotas. You have to remember the rules for that are that 8 players need to be trained in the association, meaning trained in PSG's case in France, and half of those, so 4 players must be from the own academy. And the definition for that is at least 3 years in that club between the ages of 15 and 21, which quite conveniently makes Nuno Mendes suitable for that because he came so early. But otherwise, especially if Presnel Kimpembe is not ready to play, which he may or may not, we have to dig deep into the academy to get that quota filled. You know, what could have helped? A homegrown backup keeper, but let's just see what the rest of the transfer window holds. But that was the first match, a friendly match at that, tipping the toes into the new season very briefly, and this is where it starts. Not too much time to improve, of course, but at this time of the year, the curve of development is and has to be very steep. It took a few days longer than what we had expected to finalize and announce the João Neves deal, but it is all good in the end, and Renato Sanchez returned back home to Benfica as part of the same deal. Wish him the best of luck out there, and he could use it, because I remember in 2016 when he was the best young player in the Euros, which were of course played in France, and of course Portugal went to win the whole trophy. I was so impressed by Renato Sanchez, and I wish that he could come to Paris, but that was not the case. That wasn't meant to be at the time. He went to Bayern, and he has had very tough luck on his career. Finally, he came to Paris from Lille as a champion of France, but the injuries have been sabotaging his career all the way, and hopefully he can get a new lease on life in his formative club Benfica. He returns there on loan with an option to buy. Willian Pacho should be joining us imminently and might already be done deal when you listen to this episode. I'm recording this on Thursday morning. I think he's traveling to Paris today and has his medical checkup. Might already be there, but unless there's a dramatic U-turn, he should be our player very shortly. Like said, possibly by the time you're listening to this. He's a young 22-year-old defender from Ecuador who has played for Eintracht Frankfurt in Bundesliga last season, and before that in Belgian Pro League for Royal Antwerp. Fairly tall, 188 centimeters or 6'2", which is the same height as Milan Skriniar. So good physical presence for our defense to win those aerial duels, and especially defending the corners and such. We have struggled with all that in the past few seasons at least. Hopefully also scoring 1 or 2 from our corners in the attacking ends. That would be a great bonus. Pacho has 15 caps for his national team and 2 goals there, whereas in Germany he played 44 matches last season. He's pretty much a starter for Frankfurt. No goals there, but as a centre back, that is not primarily, of course, what we are expecting from him. So they are all a bonus thing, like said. The deal, according to the information I have at hand, should be for 40 million euros plus bonus, which would be reportedly around 5 million in transfer fees. So the value of contract is roughly 45 million all in all, and the duration for it should be 5 years. We will see how that information changes, or is it more or less accurate when we get the final information of this deal, as they will appear, I think, fairly soon online or wherever. Listen, I'm not going to disrespect you by claiming that I know more about him than what I actually do. I know it's a thing that people do online. I'm not a specialist. I haven't followed Frankfurt or Bundesliga in such detail that I could give you an analysis. that is actually meaningful, that would add some sort of value to this conversation. Basically, I have watched some highlights, and the first thing to say about the highlights is that they are just that, they're highlights. Just like if someone's Instagram is full of photos of travels and cocktails under the palm tree, it doesn't mean that it's a good description of their reality on a day-to-day basis. We know all this, right? It's just the highlights, and not too much should be read into those. But having said that, the word Kimpembesk comes to mind. It's not really even a word as such, but his defending reminded me of President Kimpembe a little bit. So let's see how this works out once we get him announced and he gets to start his life in red and blue. And fingers crossed, if this works like we hope it will, what does that mean to Kimpembe? Well, Beraldo's injury in Austria certainly underlines that we don't have enough defenders as it is. I mean, I'm not saying that hopefully Beraldo's injury is not serious, but even if it isn't, it's just a reminder that anything can happen. We are still one Marquinhos injury away from a situation that might sabotage the entire campaign. And last season, Marquinhos did miss some football due to an issue here and there. He's not a young man. Just because he came to Paris as a young man doesn't mean that he's that young anymore. It feels a bit weird to say that because I'm considerably older than he is, of course, but I'm also not a young man. So even with this new addition, I feel like defense still remains our weak spot. There's a lot of talk about our attack then and the need to sign players to score goals. And it is true that from last season we're losing a lot of goals that were scored by the guy who has since left. Our former number 7, you know him, and it's true. It's true that he has given us those goals for several seasons now. And football matches are won by scoring more goals than the opponent. So it's a kind of a key consideration. And it is true that the amount of goals that were scored by, say, Bradley Barcola, Ousmane Dembele, Randal Kolomuani, Marco Asensio, and Gonzalo Ramos combined, and even if you add Vitinha or Lee Kang in or anybody else to that, it's just not enough. It's not enough. As it was last season, just not enough. So if you look at it like that, an argument can be made that we need a prolific goal scorer, Osimhen or someone like that. I don't, however, look at it quite like that, though, because that guy, Kylian Mbappe, he required the whole system to work for him. It lacked the element of surprise, and it forced good players to play according to his needs and his positioning, perhaps even by his mood and motivation on the day. But now, these same players can play more freely. We can have a target player who is actually targeted, if that's the way that we choose to play, not one running back and forth in the box without ever getting any service, which often was the case when, for instance, Gonzalo Ramos was on the pitch together with Kylian Mbappe. We now have Nuno Mendes and Bradley Barcola running on the flank, Hakimi and Dembele on the other side. And I'm not saying that we don't need depth and options. We know that at any time we can have an injury and player can miss the entire season because of it, but I'm not sure to what extent a star player is needed. We need good players for sure for strength of the squad, but they don't necessarily have to be star players, at least not in my views. Stars are for marketing purposes. That's a different matter. Of course they can make the difference on the pitch as well. Usually they are stars because they are great players, but we don't have to page through our diaries backwards for too long to be reminded that stars don't necessarily mean respectable football and good results. Even if you have all the Ballon d'Or contestants on the pitch at the same time, this remains still a team sport. And I might regret this later, and I promise to acknowledge if I have been wrong with this, if this assessment is wrong. Of course, I will acknowledge that, but I'm perfectly happy to have, for instance, Gonzalo Ramos as our starter, as our number 9, as he has on his shirt, and I think he can score 25 goals if we give him that chance. I'm willing to take that risk. Of course, I'm not the one who's really going to be held accountable if that happens, but I believe that he can do that. I don't see why he wouldn't, because last season he wasn't given a proper opportunity. Some people are saying that he had some opportunity. He had some opportunities, but he didn't get consistent playing time where the system that we had would have supported his style of playing. As a striker, you are dependent on what happens around you. That's just the way that it goes. Let's go back one more season. let's try to learn lessons from even our very recent past. When PSG had both Messi and Neymar in attack with Kylian Mbappe, it so happened that their style depended a little bit on the day, but essentially they would drop into the midfield and build from there. Before a new year, it worked pretty well. They were doing pretty good. Neymar and Messi were excellent, even as they were fully motivated and healthy gearing towards the World Cup. But then it didn't work anymore. But the problem is that they hang out there in the midfield, and when they do that, it makes it very difficult for the actual midfielders to find a natural place and position so that they can add value and more than anything, not be on the way. Players like Vitinha and Fabian Ruiz. Some people think that Vitinha's first season wasn't very good. I think he had a very good first season. Some parts of it, of course, were better than others, but when he wasn't at his best, no one in the team really was. It was pretty desperate time that whole spring. I think we might have even forgotten, and maybe it's better that way, but that spring of that season was really quite miserable time, and it was just not working out very well, and the team just had lacked everything that a football team needs. It felt like that despite having all the best names, or many of the best names in the world on the back of their shirts on the pitch. So if the midfield works based on the vibes of a few superstars who on their day are the best in the world, but might also not be, it isn't easy for players like Vitinha. I think that it's difficult to blame him for those things because you can't find a natural position. And I think this was even more case with Fabian Ruiz, who of course now has had an excellent Euro. So we have actually recently seen how good he can be. Of course, he hasn't been quite as good for PSG, but we know the potential is pretty up there. It's very strong player also when he gets the right system. But his first season, which was then the last season of Neymar and Messi, it was just very confusing time for other midfielders. Maybe somebody like Marco Verratti could play there. He didn't have a great season, but he could play there because he kind of had paid the dues. He was part of the same level of players, same sort of class of players that they would be playing together very well. But these other ones, they just had to sort of like get used to what was happening around them, and it doesn't necessarily make them very useful players on the pitch then in the long run. So Vitinha, especially, Fabian Ruiz also, but also the whole team benefited so much from there being a system where everyone plays their part. And that could be seen last season. Last season, we saw that. We saw that happening when it wasn't just like vibes and whatever on the pitch. So at best, why am I talking about this? Because this liberation could now be happening to our front line. What was happening last season to our midfield could now actually be happening to our front line. I see no reason why our forwards, who couldn't achieve the numbers that they and we were hoping for last season, couldn't get it done this year, now that we have one fewer unbenchable ego in the mix. At best, the collective effort will equal the input of one player and exceed it. Far exceeded. It's very possible. And it's a question of, is it a chance that we're taking? Now, future, of course, it is unknown, but I'm not too worried myself. I'm perfectly willing to give these players a chance. Who are then the players who have been rumored to be candidates for our attacking enforcement? Victor Osimhen has been mentioned many times during this summer. I mentioned him already in this episode also, but his price tag will be outrageous and Napoli won't be easy to negotiate with. They're famous for that. Same as with Kvaratskhelia, who was the talk of the town in the early part of the summer, but as good as these players are, and they are very good players, I'm fine without them because pragmatically speaking, there might not be enough time to deal with their current club, the negotiations, and both will be very expensive anyway. I don't know exactly what is the PSG's financial situation because actually also it depends on how the final negotiations with Kylian Mbappe, who then chose to leave on a free transfer, did he actually excuse some loyalty bonuses or whatever, and to what extent, how much money was saved, how much money was lost. it's very difficult to know the precise numbers, and I'm not here to be the accountant for PSG either, but just to say that some of these players will be very expensive, and if we get them, then that will mean that we can't maybe get other players that could be useful. But in the case of these Napoli players like Osimhen and Kvaratskhelia, is that it's also very time consuming to try to make those deals, and there's less than a month left of the transfer window, so you have to prioritize, I suppose. Jadon Sancho has been talked about. We will see. It's a price question. I think, at least the way that I look at it, and with him, it really would be ideal if it could be a loan deal with an option to buy, because in the perfect world we could see first if we are getting the Dortmund Sancho or Manchester United Sancho, but it's quite an ambition to get such a deal. And now also Kingsley Coman has entered the chat. Well, Coman is a Titi Parisian and the scorer of the only goal in the Champions League final. The only Champions League final where we have played, and that goal was to our detriment, of course, at the time. And I do wish him well, but with his injuries and probable price, I'm not sure if that is the solution either. Some strengthening is needed, and I think, to me, primarily on the wings. To me, the striker's position isn't so urgent. I was talking about that before. We have solid striker and other options, and on top of that, PSG hasn't really played through a proper target player, a striker, since Mauro Icardi or Cavani before him, so is that even a priority to get those players if we haven't used them and we have Gonzalo Ramos? Of course, it might be that because, well, in the absence of Kylian Mbappe, essentially, that Luis Enrique will want to start playing through a target player like Gonzalo Ramos. Like I've said earlier, to me, I'm perfectly happy with him the way that he is. I feel like we have that covered if we need that, but wingers are a different matter. Not in that we don't have any options. Of course, we have Ousmane Dembele and Bradley Barcola. That can easily be our starting players. Dembele had an injury-free season last season in Paris, but it's difficult to just assume that he could not relapse at some point, that somehow magically his body has become something else new under the Parisian sun, that simply it was not in Catalonia. It seems unlikely. I don't wish or even expect him to necessarily be injured. Of course, I don't want that to happen, but at the same time, the team must be prepared for such eventuality, as is the case with all players, but of course some have more of a history with injuries than others. So for the wing, I would like to maybe see Desiree Doué from Stade Rennais, but that is still an ongoing battle between PSG and Bayern, while the player himself is preparing for the Olympic final right now as I record. Can only cross my fingers for this dossier, although it will be a very expensive deal if we get it. Very expensive. Doué has plenty of potential, of course, and it could be one of the best deals, but of course he isn't too tested in big matches, even in these Olympics. And we know that Olympic football is not like the other big international tournaments, but even in this Olympics, he's only getting very little playing time, whereas another player who has been mentioned in connection to us sometimes, pretty much, I guess, every summer by somebody, but that is Ryan Cherki. He has really had any playing time in the Olympics so far, so make of that what you will. One forward who doesn't excite me at all is Julian Alvarez from Argentina. It's not even about his skill and ability, although he played incredibly mediocre Olympics. Maybe he was not motivated, maybe he was tired, but the way he was playing with his national team Argentina in the Olympics was just very forgettable. But of course, it's currently this beef between France and Argentina. I'm sure maybe you have heard of it, and I feel we shouldn't take risks with that. And also, this is quite important to me, certainly. Alvarez was happily in a bus where extremely racist songs was sang by part of the national team, himself possibly included. I don't know, I didn't see that part of the footage, but we know that he was there enjoying the evening, and I just don't have any time for racist. It's very nasty stuff, and it should not be normalized ever. I don't want to deal with that. So to me, that is a no. That is all for now, from PSG Review, the season is starting. The very short preseason is on, and we aren't far away from the actual Ligue 1 football. Can you believe it? The first match will be on the road against Le Havre, and it's Friday night, actually starting the whole new season for everyone in France. The date for that is 16th of August, and it starts local time 8:45 in the evening. You can count your own time difference to that if you have any to the Central European time zone. And like mentioned already earlier, before that we have match against RB Leipzig on the weekend, 10th of August, Saturday evening at 6 p.m. local time again. Women's team will start the season proper only on September 21st, and before that there will be a handful of friendlies, also including a trip to Australia to play other teams there. Many players from the women's team have been in the Olympics. In the women's football, the Olympics is not the same as in men's, as in you can have the best players, whereas in men's players it's like under 23, and then you can have 3 additional players who are over 23. But in women, there's no such limitations, so some of our best players have been playing there in the Olympics. Only Corbin Albert is left there in the final, but at the same time, for instance, the French players, they haven't yet returned to the training ground either. No new recruits since the last we covered this whole situation a few episodes ago, but perhaps in the next episode of PSG Review there's more to talk about it when it comes to that. Until that, take care. My name is Mikko, and thanks for listening. Peace.